Before Tartarus, nothing could truly go wrong, because nothing remained long enough to become wrong. Deviation existed, but it never persisted. Every imbalance dissolved back into motion before it could accumulate, before it could harden. There was no duration to error, no memory of misplacement. But once falling gains a final below. Error acquires time. It stops being an event and begins to exist as a state. Not because the universe becomes cruel, not because judgment appears, but because return disappears. When something cannot come back, its absence does not vanish. It remains present as a condition. From this moment on, existence must account for what is no longer there. Even if no one is watching, even if nothing understands yet. This episode is about that shift. The moment error stops being temporary and begins to shape reality itself. Falling without escape does more than end motion. It completes a structure where outcomes cannot be reversed by continuation. Once a descent reaches an absolute below, movement cannot undo itself by persisting. Time no longer heals deviation by default. Before this, error was indistinguishable from variation. Now error acquires persistence, not as guilt, but as location that cannot be vacated. This is why Tartarus matters even before it is used. A sealed depth alters behavior above it. Not by pulling, but by refusing return. What falls does not disappear. It exits interaction permanently, and permanence changes everything else that remains. Because remaining now means adjusting around loss. This is the beginning of consequences structure. Mistakes become permanent when correction becomes impossible, not when intention fails, not when choice is wrong, but when structure denies reversal. Before Tartarus, a wrong direction could scatter and resolve. Now a wrong direction can continue indefinitely. Not because it is wrong, but because nothing forces it back. This is the birth of irreversibility, not as punishment, but as geometry. A state where some positions cannot be exchanged for others. Once this exists, reality must carry its misalignments forward. They cannot be erased by motion. They cannot be forgiven by time. They simply remain present, and presence without correction becomes weight. Not emotional weight, structural weight that existence must support. Permanent mistakes do not remain isolated in Tartarus. They propagate upward through the system. Because structure is continuous even when interaction is not. What cannot return below reshapes what must remain above. Paths adjust, distances compress, positions become conditional on absence. Nothing breaks yet, nothing resists yet, but alignment begins to change. Existence starts behaving as if something matters, even though nothing knows what that thing is. This is not awareness, it is response. The universe does not remember consciously, but structure begins to retain information. Loss leaves a trace not as memory, but as constraint on future movement. When loss becomes permanent, adaptation becomes necessary, not because anything wants to survive, but because remaining requires adjustment. What stays must now account for what cannot return. This accounting creates imbalance. Imbalance creates strain. Not immediately, not violently, but inevitably.
Let the inevitable come.
Before this, existence could expand without cost. Now expansion accumulates consequence. Positions grow closer. Space begins to compress rather than disperse. This is how permanence introduces pressure, not by force, but by removing options, the fewer directions available, the more strain must be carried by those that remain. Gaia begins to change here, not in action, but in role. Before Tartarus, Gaia was endurance without tension. Ground existed but did not accumulate burden. Now ground must carry what cannot leave. Permanence forces accumulation. Accumulation forces load. Load transforms neutrality into pressure. This is not collapse, not rupture, but preparation. The system has not broken. It has learned to hold. And holding is never neutral for long, because holding without release stores consequence. Gaia does not choose this change. It inherits it from depth itself. Mistakes become permanent because correction requires return, and return no longer exists. This is the simplest rule Tartarus introduces. Once something cannot pass back through a boundary, time cannot erase its effect. Even if nothing touches it again, even if nothing observes it, absence becomes active through what it prevents. What cannot happen anymore becomes as influential as what does. This is how structure begins to remember, not by storing events, but by limiting futures. Each irreversible outcome narrows the range of motion above it. And narrowing accumulates silently until something must change. Not by choice, but by necessity. Permanent error is not moral failure. There is no good or bad here. Only states that cannot be exchanged for others. The universe does not judge misalignment. It adapts around it. But adaptation has cost. The cost is stored as tension. Tension does not demand release immediately. It waits. This waiting is important because nothing explodes yet. Nothing rebels yet. The system remains stable. But stability under load is temporary by definition.
Approaching a structural threshold.
What holds without yielding prepares for fracture. Even if fracture has not been imagined yet. Why mistakes become permanent is not because they are severe, but because they persist. Severity requires comparison. Permanence requires only duration. A small deviation that cannot be corrected becomes more influential than a large one that dissolves. This is why Tartarus is more important than conflict. It introduces lasting asymmetry into existence. Once asymmetry exists, equilibrium can no longer be assumed. Balance becomes effort rather than default. And effort accumulates cost. This cost is not visible yet, but it is measurable in constraint. The universe begins to behave as if it is carrying weight. Even before weight is named. Structure now distinguishes between reversible and irreversible states. This distinction did not exist before. Everything used to be exchangeable. Now some positions cannot be swapped. This creates hierarchy in space itself. Not of value, but of accessibility. Below becomes final. Above becomes conditional. And conditional existence must constantly adjust to what it cannot undo. This adjustment is not conscious. It is automatic, and automatic responses accumulate faster than awareness ever could. The system tightens not because it wants to, but because it has fewer paths available than before. Once error persists, time changes character. Before Tartarus, time was sequence without cost. Now time accumulates consequence, not moral consequence, structural consequence. Duration becomes meaningful because states endure. This is the beginning of history as burden. Not as story, but as accumulation of irreversible conditions. Nothing can simply reset anymore. Every continuation carries what came before. This is why later myths feel tragic. not because suffering is emphasized, but because repair is limited. The world no longer heals itself by default. Permanent mistakes introduce responsibility without agents. Existence must now live with outcomes even though no one chose them. This is important because it removes intention from consequence. Things happen not because they are desired, but because structure allows no alternative.
Present clings to the shape of the past.
The universe becomes constrained by its own past
We
positions,
are bound.
not by memory, but by geometry. Every irreversible descent writes a rule into space. A rule that future motion must obey.
Complete. Trajectories bound.
This is how Tartarus governs without acting. By defining what cannot be undone, as irreversible states multiply, flexibility decreases, pressure increases, not as force, but as requirement to hold incompatible positions together. What remains above Tartarus must now support what cannot return. This support creates strain. Strain is not yet rupture, but rupture becomes inevitable once strain has nowhere to go. Gaia begins to feel this not as pain, but as load. Load that cannot be released by motion alone. Because motion no longer escapes the system.
The weight persists. They cannot move.
It only rearranges
Internal
weight.
rearrangement only. No release.
This is why permanence matters more than falling itself. Falling is an event. Permanence is a condition. Events end. Conditions endure. Once conditions change, all future events occur inside them. This is the deeper consequence of Tartarus, not the fall, but the world that must continue afterward. A world where some errors cannot be corrected, only carried, only endured. And endurance without release always accumulates tension. Nothing in the system resists yet, because resistance requires opposition, and opposition has not formed. For now, everything still holds. But holding is not equilibrium. It is delay. Delay before release becomes necessary. The universe has not reached that point yet, but it is moving toward it simply by continuing. No intention is required. No will is involved. Accumulation alone is enough. This is how structure prepares for events it does not yet know will occur. Preparation is not foresight. It is inevitability. Nothing in the system resists yet, because resistance requires opposition, and opposition has not formed. For now, everything still holds, but holding is not equilibrium. It is delay. Delay before release becomes necessary. The universe has not reached that point yet, but it is moving toward it simply by continuing. No intention is required. No will is involved. Accumulation alone is enough. This is how structure prepares for events it does not yet know will occur. Preparation is not foresight. It is inevitability. The system has not broken, but it has learned to remember. Not by recording events, but by carrying constraints forward. Every irreversible outcome narrows the future slightly, and narrowing accumulates pressure. Pressure does not ask permission to exist. It waits until release becomes the only remaining option. This waiting defines the next stage of existence, where holding is no longer enough, and separation becomes necessary. The universe is approaching that threshold now. Not dramatically, not violently, but unavoidably. This episode was not about falling. It was about what permanence does to existence itself. About why some errors can never be fixed, and how structure begins to remember what it has lost. The next episode is not about Tartarus. It is about what happens above it. When accumulated pressure can no longer be held, when neutrality gives way to tension, and Gaia stops being mere endurance, because pressure must either be released or tear structure apart. That moment has not arrived yet, but it is now inevitable.